Hello, everyone. Welcome this evening. Thank you very much for tuning in or opening your laptop after your dinner to hear this chat between me, Jonny Geller. I'm a literary agent, and I'm proud to say I am Tracy Chevalier's literary agent, and have been for quite a few years. And I'm really thrilled, actually, that Harper Fiction Presents organised this, because it's a great chance for us to talk in a well, we've never done this before in public. No. We normally do it on the phone or by email, and once or twice a year actually have a lunch. And it's been quite a while. But also, it's a really good opportunity to celebrate. I've got my props here. 20 years since this little beauty was published. This is the American version.
I've got the American version too.
I think we both liked it at the time. It was a very strong, yes, I remember that.
This type of cover got copied a lot, the sort of 2/3 size here and then a strip of historical.
That's right, yes. Yeah, you did, you pioneered that, I remember that. In fact, I remember the UK version, which is this one, which was very tasteful, but it wasn't quite as impactful as this one.
She's too small in it. You need to have her big, yeah.
Although this edition is very important because this is the one, I don't know if anyone can see, but it actually has a typo. I think it's the blurry girl with the pearl earring with only one R. So I'm hoping that's very valuable in years to come.
It is very valuable. Hang on to it. It'll pay for your kids' college education. Maybe not that much. Maybe half of one semester.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, we want to celebrate this, and we will talk about this a bit later. But also, it's a great opportunity because last month, this book was published in paperback, Single Thread, which is actually one of my favorite of your novels. I don't think I've said that to you before. I really love this book. And it's coming out, well, it's out in paperback now at all good bookshops. And we'll talk about that towards the end because it sort of bookends our conversation. Well, anyway, I hope everyone is settled in. And I just thought I think let's start at the beginning, because in a way we both we're 25 years together nearly next year, as longer than most marriages. And I remember quite distinctly a letter you sent me in 1996. And I can't remember whether you sent me the book with it or you just said, would you read this book? But you were a student at UEA, I think, at the time, or maybe you just graduated. Over to you. What's your memory?
Let me tell you the story. I did an MA in creative writing in 1993 and 94, and one of my cohort was a guy named Martin Bedford. And in 1996, I was on holiday with my husband I think we'd gone to the Grand Canyon, and we were in a diner in Arizona. And I opened, the only newspaper we could get was USA Today. So I was reading it, and I got to this article. This article. Okay, and I opened it, and I went, my God, there's Martin. There's Martin. And it said, first-time novelist act of liberation. Okay, so this is really American. It's hilarious. Fact sure is stranger than fiction. One day you're a part-time copy editor at a small British newspaper making $320 a week. The next week, a heralded writer with a $158,000 advance for your first novel and a hefty deal with U.S. publishing giant Doubleday. It's a dream come true, Martin Bedford said. So it goes on like that. And basically, what my favorite part of this is that it mentions you. It says, with the advance money, Bedford plans to buy a word processor and a Ford Fiesta. My wife and I have very simple tastes, he said. So there's a wonderful contrast in this short article about the really American, like, wow, and Martin deliberately undercutting it. But then the next thing it says, that could change. Bedford's agent, Jonny Geller, says coyly, just say that Doubleday made it worth my while not to shop around. It was hilarious, but I read that and I thought, my God, Martin got a big deal, £100,000 advance for his novel that he had started on the MA course. So I had read it. I read some of it. And I got back to England, and I contacted Martin and said, congratulations. And I said, who is this guy, Jonny Geller? And he said, well, he's just become an agent. And I said, do you think he would read because I've just finished a novel. Do you think might read it? He said, sure. Well, he's just starting, so he doesn't have any clients. Go, Tracy. So I wrote you that letter, which you got, and I said, you know, you got Martin Bedford £100,000. My friend Martin Bedford £100,000 advance. Do you think you could do that for me? And you said, send me what you got. So I sent you The Virgin Blue, my first novel, and you read it and said, yeah, I can do something with this. And you indeed sold it for way less money than £100,000, but 100,000 was a really surprising amount for anybody. So it was. So this was mine was a somewhat rather more realistic amount.
That is the flip side about getting publicity for your deals.
Yes. Everybody expects you to do perfect, big a deal.
No, I mean, look, frankly, if you'd have known how little experience I had by the time you'd sent me your novel, I think you might have looked elsewhere.
Tell us how you sold that novel.
Well, it was an extraordinary time because my boss, I'd worked at Curtis Brown, where I still am, as an assistant for 2 years. And then my boss left one day, and I just didn't have a job, and nobody seemed to notice. Wow. So I was sort of going into work and hiding. I would literally hide behind these kind of little shelves, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? So I just read all what they used to call, terrible terms, slush pile, the kind of the unsolicited manuscripts that poured into these agencies.
There's a whole room full of them, thousands of them. Yeah,
it really was. In fact, we used to put them in the broom cupboard. I mean, that's how terrible it was. It was like just filled with people's dreams and hopes. We've changed, I should say. All online. It's very respectful now. But so I was reading madly, and then I saw one by this guy from UEA, and UEA is, we shouldn't downplay it. It was the creative writing course that spurned Ishiguro and Ian McEwan.
It was also the only creative writing course at the time.
Yes, exactly. And there are plenty in the States, and they always have been. But in the UK, there really wasn't any. And it was very prestigious. So it wasn't like a genius to realize you better read this one. And it was called Act of Revision. And it just had this very simple sort of line, which was about a guy who stumbles on his old school reports in his attic. And it sort of triggers a psychotic episode where he decides to take revenge on his school teachers. And I thought, that's a really clever idea. And it was funny.
Yeah, and he takes revenge very specifically. His English techer, he does a very English theory. His history teacher does a very history type thing
exactly.
too.
Each chapter is a different subject. So I had nothing to lose, which is one of the great lessons in life. Is it's always good to have nothing to lose. And I didn't really have a job, and I was a fake. And so I just called up 4 publishers, all of whom I wouldn't have. I was pretty intimidated by, and just said, I'm the new agent at Curtis Brown. I've got this really hot book. You got to get back to me by next week. And I put the phone down and, had a sleepless weekend thinking, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to be, and I came back on the Monday. In fact, it was a Tuesday because it was a bank holiday. I remember it. And then there were 4 messages on my machine from these 4 publishers all saying, I want to preempt. And I was thinking, I don't know what preempt means. So I had to ask someone. So by the end of the week, the guy had, we'd sold it all around the world. And
and you were quickly made an agent.
Well, I slightly sneakily, and this is where I probably shouldn't admit this, a friend of mine worked at The Guardian at the time. So I said, look, I think there's a really good story here. A guy who writes for the Bradford and Telegraph Argus, who gets £75 a week, is now getting close to $500,000. And a little assistant in a literary agency is suddenly an agent. So he wrote the piece. Also, he didn't, someone else did. And I just presented it to my then boss and said, look, it says in The Guardian, I'm an agent. So that was kind of my little story. It was, so then I was off. And I remember reading Virgin Blue because it was not anything like I normally read, because it was this dual narrative. And it was historical.
Contemporary and historical, In
fact, I think it's the only contemporary bit of writing we've done, actually.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was also another good hook. And it was really well written. I mean, the thing is that you can't overestimate is the confidence of your writing, even from those days. I'm sure if you look back at it, it just has what you're doing. So you're immediately feeling comfortable with the writing. And I really enjoyed it. It was I think there was hardly any editing on that book. I can't remember.
Not much.
So we sold it to Penguin, to an editor there. And I remember, in fact, here's my prop. This is the original paperback and the cover. I don't know whether you can see that.
Yeah, and it was published in paperback. They didn't come out with hardback. Yeah.
And then, do you remember what happened? It was picked by Smiths and their Fresh Talent Award.
Yeah.
Which is a bit like the Richard and Judy now. It's a very influential paperback seller. And so the book sold really well. And I remember I was really pleased. And then it got a bit complicated, didn't it? Because after that, your second novel, well, we know what the second novel was, but there was a bit of a journey to that. And I'll be interested to see whether your take on that journey is different from mine.
I'll tell you my take, and then you can tell me your take. So after The Virgin Blue, I started writing a contemporary novel set in Highgate Cemetery, where I was a tour guide, and it was called Live a Little. And I wrote a draft of it, and I finished that and sent it to you.
Yeah.
And at the same time, just before I sent it to you, I had, one morning I was lying in bed and I woke up and looked at this poster of this Vermeer painting that I had always loved. And I had had the poster hanging wherever I lived for many years. And the painting was called Girl with the Pearl Earring. And I was lying in bed and I looked at it and I thought, I wonder what the painter did to her to make her look like this expression. What's she thinking? Is she happy? Is she sad? And it was the first time I had actually connected the two and thought, that look is actually about them. It's not about her. It's about the relationship. And what is the relationship? Is she a daughter? Is she a neighbor? Who is she? And I got up and I went to the exhibition catalog of a Vermeer show I'd been to a year before. And I'd seen Girl with the Pearl Earring in the flesh. And I read about the painting, and they had no idea who she was. They don't know who any of his models were, and they know very little about him. And I thought, great, I can just make it up. So I did. I made up the story about who she was and why he painted her and the process of painting. And it became a book about an aesthetic meeting of the minds. So at the time, I had the idea. I was still finishing the other one. I put it in the back of my mind, and I finished this Live a Little draft. I sent that to you, and I also sent you a page that said, I have another idea for the next book, which is about this Vermeer painting, and I wrote a bit about it. What do you think? And then it's awful when you send your book to your agent or your editor because you're waiting, wondering what the hell they're going to say. I got really ill. I had the flu. And when I got better, you said, come in, let's have a meeting. And we had a meeting. And I was still pretty sick. and you said, that novel set in Highgate Cemetery doesn't quite work. But you know that Vermeer idea? No, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Work on that. Put Live a Little in a drawer, set it aside. You didn't say burn it or throw it away. I haven't done either of those yet, but I should someday. But focus on the Vermeer idea. That's a good idea. And that was, you've given me a lot of really good advice in my life, but that was the best thing you ever said to me, was work on the Vermeer. That's an idea, because you saw something in that right away that would work. And so I did. And what do you remember that meeting?
Well, I do remember that meeting very much. I mean, it's the agent's worst nightmare, where they've got a writer they really like and respect and think is great, and the book is good, because I don't think you can write a dull sentence. It's just I was thinking, is this the book that's going to move your readership on? Is it going to help you sell more? And there were some flaws with it, which you could fix. And I remember thinking, what do I say to her? It's terrible. It's one of the. And then I think the fact that we had a meeting, you probably knew this wasn't going to be as straightforward. Otherwise, there would just be an email or a call.
Yeah, a call saying, I love it.
Yeah.
We're going to sell it like hotcakes.
I was very nervous, because I think, when you're a young agent, even when you're an old agent like me, you basically, if you say to an author that you don't love it, sometimes the author can say, well, you don't love, maybe you've fallen out of love with my whole work. Maybe you don't understand where I'm going, and maybe it's time for me to change. And so I was prepared for you to say, look, thanks a lot, Jonny. I'm going to try and find another agent and whatever. My memory is not that you wrote that one page. My memory is that you sat there looking more and more depressed. Now I know that you were ill. I don't think I knew that at the time. And that at the end of it, I just sort of said, to try and pick things up, I said, have you got any other ideas? And you said, well, there's this painting at the end of my bed, and I always look at it. and I'd love to tell the story of this girl. And that was my memory of it. And I just sort of, my instinct was, well, that sounds good. And then you said to me, the trouble is I'm pregnant. And I remember thinking, well, you better write it then quickly.
Quick. Yes.
And I think actually, weirdly, those two things that happened, the fact that you really had a deadline, a literal deadline that you couldn't go beyond because you had a baby coming, and the fact that you had to overcome, a setback, like the agent's not even going to send my book out, I think made this book so concentrated. And, I don't know, I also don't remember much of an editorial chat when that book was delivered, because it was sort of perfect. I remember a conversation or two about some of the things, but it was like, it is. I remember there was a review in Time magazine calling it a perfect gem or a jewel. And it was one of those things that was almost a miracle, and I loved it. And the trouble is I didn't know, nobody knew that this would resonate with millions of people.
Tell everybody about how you sold it, because that's, nobody ever hears, everybody's heard me talking about that book a million times. And we can talk in a minute about what makes that book the success it is. But it's about the publishers too. How did you sell it? So the UK and US, two very different markets, two very different publishers.
And also the nature of historical fiction is it goes in and out of fashion. So sometimes you can write a brilliant historical novel, but people are just not reading them. And other times everyone's reading historical novels and they're all working, even the bad ones, So it's very difficult to judge with historical. But I remember, so this book, Virgin Blue, which had been well published by Penguin, I sent the manuscript to the same editor of Girl with the Pearl Earring, and she did make an offer, but it was not what I felt was worthy of this book.
I think she offered the same amount as she did for Virgin Blue, and we're talking tiny.
It was very small, and I thought actually this had more commercial potential. Yeah. So I then thought, well, actually, there was an editor who had moved from Penguin to HarperCollins called Susan Watt, who's very experienced, knew her historical fiction like better than me, and I thought I'd give her a call. And so when I spoke to her, she immediately remembered Virgin Blue very well and wanted to read it. And her reaction was instantaneous. I seem to remember. It was just, this is wonderful. And
you have a quote that you were going to read.
So Susan, actually, who couldn't be here because she was going to join us in a chat about Girl with a Pearl. So she sent in a little quote, which I hope you don't mind if I read. She said, "I can still recall the intense pleasure it gave me to enter the world of the girl for the first time. The town of Delft, the historical settings, the characters, and the society in which they lived, all so superbly portrayed. And above all, of course, the artist, the way he worked, and the creation of that painting, all so rich, all so cleverly constructed, that we wholly accept her presentation of the girl, whom we only know from that painting, and are totally absorbed in the stories she creates." And remembering that first reading, Girl with a Pearl Earring, was different, not only from Tracy's previous book, but from other historical novels that were around at the time. I knew straight away I wanted to publish it, and that we would, in the end, succeed. It was a joyous gift and a true pleasure to work with Tracy on it, and many to follow, which is lovely. But it was true. So we moved publisher, which is rare after a first novel to do that. So it was a risk. I remember talking to you about it. We weighed up the pros and cons, but in the end, publishing is about enthusiasm. You have to go with people who are going to stay up late at night worrying about your book and caring about it and actually thinking, I need this to succeed. And I think Susan was a great champion, and that relationship that she started, you're still at HarperCollins 10 novels on, so that was an important moment. And then in America it was different because you are American, so
then
that
you also
go on, sorry.
The Americans did not, the Virgin Blue was published only in the UK and in Germany, oddly enough, but we didn't find a US publisher. And I remember you then really wanted to, once you sold the Girl with the Pearl Earring to the UK, you were looking around for a US publisher. And I believe one walked into your office one day, Claire Ferraro.
Oh yeah.
Claire
was, I sort of vaguely remember that she's a fearsome, ferocious New York publisher. She's like the opposite of what I would imagine you would probably have been published by. She's very young. Oh, what do you got? What do you got? It's kind of like, why are you here? And And I remember pitching it to her, and she goes, "Okay, send her over." And you know, next thing you know, she was buying it, and there was an editor who was attached to it actually, who left. What's her name? Do you remember?
I can't remember. I've been through a lot of editors, not through.
He was the
That
first
sounds
one.
like I'm, you know, I send them away, or I scare them
She
off.
left. She left the business.
Yeah, people leave, people retire, people move to other publishers. It happens all the time. You're the one constant in my life, in the publishing.
Agents often are. I see publishers, they tend to get better jobs. Agents, we're stuck, you know.
but that, and I've always been incredibly grateful to you for that steadfastness, and also your honesty with me. I think we started our relationship with me saying, I want you to be honest with me. You don't have to sugarcoat things with me. And that's why you were able to say, when I turned in that novel that wasn't very good, you could say, this doesn't work. Can you put it aside?
But do you know what? I think that was the turning point for both of us, because in a sense, had we not had that honest conversation, it might not have cemented the long-term relationship. And also, it wouldn't have allowed Girl with the Pearl at that moment to come out. So it was a bit of luck and a bit of serendipity, but it also, it is absolute, the relationship between an agent and an author has to be honest, and that's and it, you know, there is nothing else, because we've got to be a kind of objective friend. I've got to be on your side at all times, but I have to be able to tell the truth, even if it's difficult. Yeah,
but you know, a lot of times friends don't. So when women go shopping together, sometimes the really good friend will say, that dress looks terrible on you. But a lot of friends don't have the guts to do that. And they say, yeah, that looks great. So the real friend is the one who is able to be honest, but in a constructive way. And you always
I still find it hard, 25 years later.
Really?
I get a novel in and I don't love it. I still can't quite. I have the wrangle in the night, because the thing is, you also have the option, if you're an agent, to let the publishers break the bad news. You could just say to the author, yeah, this is great. And then the publisher will basically have to say, this is no good. And I just think that's not good for the author in the long run. The publisher, I believe, who is a very, very crucial partner in your life, needs to always see the best side of an author.
Well, that's what your job is, and in a way, is to run interference between, and people often ask me, do I actually need an agent? You don't, but most people will benefit from having an agent, because agents do some of the dirty work. Agents, like when I'm not happy with a cover, sometimes it's hard for me. I need to maintain a good relationship with my publisher, with my editor, and sometimes it's better coming from a third party, from you.
Yeah.
And you also have a lot of experience. I just know my books, and you know a lot of books and a lot of about how the industry is working. And sometimes I'll come to you and I'll complain about something, and you'll say, you know what, get in the line, get in the queue. This is happening to everyone. And
well, if it can give you a perspective that allows you to understand what success is, because a lot of the problem is that people don't know with books. You get published and there's no audience, there's no applause, there may be a trickle of reviews, there may be a bestseller list or not, and it's very hard to know, well, did I succeed then? How do I measure success as an author? And I think that's where an agent is very valuable, to basically say, look, this battle is worth fighting, this isn't, and also this has done well. Don't beat yourself up. This is actually a success. And when it isn't a success, to say, look, we got to strategize. We've got to think now, how do we get out of this? Because not every book will succeed. And you know that over the span of 10 books.
Of course.
And I think the funny thing about Girl is, as I call it now, is that this book, it was immediately successful in America. I remember it had that momentum before publication. It was published in January. And I remember all through the summer, you were getting these rave previews, and there was a momentum. And you could think, something's happening here. Not so in the UK, I don't think. In the UK, it was a quiet hardback publication.
Yeah, it was quiet. It was published in August, which is a tricky time because people are on holiday. On the other hand, there's more room in the newspapers to review new novels, or first-time or second-time novelist. And I got a really wonderful review in the UK from Deborah Maugach, and that helped a lot. But it was a quiet publication. It's rather like, you showed us the cover of the UK cover. It's quite quiet, whereas the American is much brasher. It's big, and that's much quieter. And I think what happened though is in the States it did really well right out of the block. And then that kind of bounced back. So in the UK, when it came out in paperback, it did really well. And actually, the best thing of all is that it was what they call a word of mouth success. And that means it doesn't matter what marketing and publicity and is put behind it. I mean, it does matter, but it really, the reason this book did well is because people loved it and they pushed it on their friends and said, you must read this book. And
yeah, but also you did represent it very well. I remember a turning point for me was when I went to the National Gallery, or was it the Portrait Gallery, and you gave a lecture. Do you remember that lecture? And I sat there in the audience and I thought, oh my God.
You were sitting next to John, my husband.
Yeah.
I think,
but
yeah.
And I thought that you did an incredible performance and a great lecture on Vermeer and on this novel. And I thought, wow, that is someone who is going to, sell this book around the world, because she just is an expert at it and is a fantastic communicator. So I think you added a lot to it. And I think it's such a simple idea, isn't it, to take a story from a picture, but nobody really had done that. I don't think there are many novels before that have done that.
It was, I think, people have asked me why the book's so successful. And I used to be oh, it's Vermeer, it's all, I just came along for the ride and aren't I lucky? And I've kind of, I'm too old for that now. I'm like, okay, I did write a good book. Yes, I did. And but the reason it's good is I think two things. One is it is about a painting that people really know and want to know more about. So it's that helped a lot. But the other reason is that there are very few books where what you say and how you say it intertwine and support each other and become bigger than themselves. So it's the story you tell. A lot of people have a good idea for a novel, and then the writing is a bit pedestrian. The writing is just okay. So you can, you remember the story, you don't remember the writing. And then sometimes you have the opposite, where they don't really say very much. They're just saying it really poetically. And that kind of falls flat too. So the best books are when the two come together. And when you said I was pregnant, I started researching the book when I found out I was pregnant. And as you said, I had to write it fast, and that forced me to make some aesthetic decisions. I thought it's going to be short. It's going to not be tricksy. It's going to be linear. It's going to be one point of view, and I'm going to tell it in the style of the way Vermeer painted his paintings. So he gave me a template, focused, a lot of light and color, focused in one corner of a room, a lot spare, cut back, cut out all the adverbs and adjectives, let it be just incredibly simple. And I think that has helped the book become what it has. So that it just made it in a way. And I do feel really lucky, but that it got published in the way that it did, but also that it's managed to sustain that.
Well, the Americans, I think, taught me quite a lot on that journey about how independents are important and how do you make word of mouth. It's one thing having
independent bookshops,
independent bookshops, how those communities can really help a book come from underneath, and also how do you translate American success all around the world, because the book was then sold everywhere, and it did very well in many, many countries. And it just sort of, and weirdly, there were a couple of Vermeer books around at the time, weren't there? Do you remember? There was
Susan Vreeland, Girl in Hyacinth Blue, and there was a Catherine Weber book. I was very.
It was a strange coincidence that you were, I'm afraid, the victor on that one. But I also remember us having a conversation when it really, really hit big, and we thought. And what was interesting about the UK is it never really went to number one in the charts. It was just continually selling. You were getting all this response. This was pre-Amazon, really, so you couldn't look at your ratings. This was just a feeling, and I remember sitting down with you. I don't know whether you'll remember this, but there was something we said that actually I still think of, because it applies to so many other authors, which is, how do we now survive this success? How do you maintain a writing career when we both deep down know that it's highly improbable, not impossible, that another book will sell 5 million copies and be made into a Hollywood movie? It's kind of, So how do you, and I wanted to ask you that, how have you retained that core as a writer?
It was really hard. You know, they always call it in with pop bands the difficult second album. You know, you've had the first albums come out and it's been this come out of nowhere, been a real surprise success. I mean, and mine was the second album, but you know, the album after the success, what do you do? What do you do you do more of the same? People said, are you going to write a sequel? Or are you going to write about the Mona Lisa? And I thought, no, I can't do that. I can't just kind of retread what I've done before, like do another painting. No. And the thing is, the way I come up with ideas is they kind of jump on me out of nowhere. And the idea I had to write the next book I wrote after Girl with the Pearl Earring was set in Highgate Cemetery, but it was a historical novel because I put away the other one.
So you didn't take bits from that novel? I always thought you did, because it was Highgate. Oh, it was just
totally different set of characters. And what I realized the mistake was I'd set the book in Highgate Cemetery in now. And actually what's interesting about the cemetery is its history and what happened to it in the past. And so I set it in 1900. And I just thought, I can't write another Girl with a Pearl Earring, so I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
But it's still historical. And that's what I've done ever since. It's when ideas jump out at me. I go to a dinosaur museum in Dorset and find out about this fossil hunter named Mary Anning. And I walk out of the museum thinking, I've got to write about her. I go around.
But is it?
Yeah.
I'm really interested, because I never understood whether you find a character like Mary Anning and think, I can embody a novel in her, or is it the concept, or is it the skill? Because, you know, you're famous really for learning a skill, quilting or you know,
embroidery or whatever.
Embroidery.
Yeah, no, it's not the skill. It's usually the person. I hear about a person, or actually, you know, a set of medieval tapestries called The Lady and the Unicorn. I read an article about them. I had known them when I was a teenager, and the article said nobody knows who they were made for or why.
So that's like great.
So it's often that it's like, wow, there's a gap that I want to fill with a story. And Mary Anning, she was a working class woman who discovered all these amazing fossils and made her way into the scientific world without any formal education. How did she do that? And how did she cope with all the men around her? And there's just questions that come up that I want answered. And that's what I find, that's it's like the gaps that I want to fill, you know. So I have all the facts, and then I have the fiction that I added in, and the key is to weave them together in a way that will allow people don't really know what happened and what didn't happen, which does irritate some people, I realize. So I'm always in the author's note trying to explain which people really existed and which didn't. So
yeah, and you have that in the recent novel with Mrs. Pestle. But I want to know, is that how you see fiction? That it's questions that you want to answer? Is that how you approach every novel then?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's not exactly that. So I have different reasons for it, but I don't want to be prescriptive about why I write something. But I usually just sense there's an untold story there, and I want to tell it. I want to figure out what it is and tell it. And whether that means uncovering stuff that really happened, or it's finding the gap and making it up. So the girl with the pearl earring, who is she? We don't know. Well, I'm going to figure out, using common sense, figure out who she might have been. And it works that way. So, yeah.
I mean, I think when you use the word gap, I actually think that's what I like most about your books, is that you don't overwrite. You leave gaps and silences, and you have characters, normally women, young women who are loners or isolated or lonely. And yet they do remarkable things, or they discover things, but so much of it is left to the reader to feel, or you know, that's something that
that's a good point to bring up this one, because we're starting to run out of time already. I can't believe it, but
yes.
This, my most recent book, is also about in a way a loner, somebody who's alone, and how she finds a community. And that, so that it is a thing that I'm and it is often women. It isn't always. I think At the Edge of the Orchard had a male protagonist, and so did the Lady and the Unicorn. But I find I'm also really interested. I mean, a novel is never going to be, it's not going to be interesting if there isn't drama, if there isn't a question that needs to be answered or a problem that needs to be solved. And when I look at the past, I tend to see the people who are the most powerless in the past were women. So women have more interesting stories because it's often about them trying to gain some kind of personal, whether it's social, economic, or political power, trying to find create a space for themselves.
Well, it's like in Remarkable Creatures, it's sort of a character who's ignored, overlooked, underestimated. And that seems to be a theme you have. And this woman in who's the heroine here is exactly that. I mean, she proves to be extremely strong and flexible in her moral world and everything, really. You know, her views are not connected to the time. But I wanted to ask you one thing, because I only thought about this. I was looking at it and thinking, this was published in 2019. So you must have been thinking about this story in 2016 or 2017. And I was thinking, there's a dark shadow on this book, which is very subtly done. It's not about the war. It's set in 1932-33 Winchester in England. And yet you know that it's pre-war, and because the shadow of the First World War is so big in this book. But it made me think, I wonder why she wrote that now. Is it Trump and Brexit? And
it was, I had the idea before Trump and Brexit. And so when that happened, it was like, oh my God, I had never seen so many references to 1930s fascism as after 2016. And it was sort of what I was writing about a little bit. I mean, it's really about a woman who has been very affected by World War I, as has everybody. And she lost her fiance and her brother. And she's trying to, she's 38 and she's still living with her parents, and she moves away from her mother and tries to create her own, she does create her own life in Winchester. And with the help of bell ringing and embroidery and Winchester Cathedral. I know it sounds a little crazy, but it kind of works, I hope. And when I was, I don't write politically, but when I was in Winchester Cathedral, looking at these cushions and kneelers that I write about, I discovered something on them that I'm not going to say because it's a spoiler, but it brings fascism right to the front. And I thought, well, I could make this a political novel, or I could be more subtle about it. So I decided to be subtle. And then, lo and behold, the world became much less subtle in the last few years. And it's just been very interesting writing about the rise of Hitler a little bit and how it affects people when actually it's going on around us.
Do you know what, reading it again, because obviously I didn't get to read my author's novels again, but I did for this little session. And what struck me is that it's one of the best pieces of writing on loneliness I've ever read. You really feel that loneliness that she feels, the hunger also, of course, because she's working hard and hasn't got enough money, but filling the time and finding this joy of embroidering and falling in love with this bell ringer. You sort of feel like, yes, it feels exciting. Whereas if you pitched it, in a funny way, it's quite a hard pitch. If you were a debut novel, that would be, that's why it's so interesting to me. I ought to ask you a few questions that have been pre-sent, because otherwise I feel like I will be told off by Liz.
Okay.
So this is someone, what's her name? This is Meg. Hello, Meg, if you're here. She's asked, I know that as part of her research, Tracy learns skills she's writing about. Do any of these skills become part of her life after the books are finished? As a bell ringer, I also wondered what she thought of ringing.
Meg, I salute you. Bell ringing is so difficult, and I spent a lot of time in the Winchester Cathedral bell tower, which has a ring of 14 bells, very unusually. You don't usually have that many. And I watched them, and they let me ring a dummy bell. And I also rang a bell once at the church near where I live in London. And that was, but it's so hard and it's so time consuming that I thought I'm not gonna, I could feel myself getting drawn into it and thinking, no, Tracy, don't, because nobody will ever see you again, and you'll never write any books. You'll just ring bells. So I tried it a bit, and I watched it a lot. I also learned to embroider the kind of embroidery. This is the spectacles case for anybody who's read the book. That's the spectacles case Violet gives her mother. And this is the needle case that she gives her her niece. And I learned to do it so that I could write about it more accurately. But I'm not sticking with embroidery. However, a couple of books ago, I wrote The Last Runaway, which was about a quilter. And I learned to quilt for that, and I still quilt. And
I was going to ask you that.
actually, I love quilting because I can, during the first lockdown, I just, when I was really feeling very jittery, it was great to sit at night on the sofa and just quietly sew. And I'm making a quilt for a friend, and beautiful colors, and it just calmed me down. And so I do continue to do it, not particularly well, but that doesn't matter. And that's one of the joys is actually I can just do it. I don't have to be good at it. I have to be good at writing, but I don't have to be great at quilting. I can just do it.
I am worried we're going to lose you on one novel where you're just going to go off and say, do you know what, that obsession I'm going to take. I thought trees might be the thing, because your husband writes books about trees, and then the orchard book.
Well, there is the possibility of Venetian glass, which is my next novel. And in fact, Elena, who has written a question that I'm just going to add, and she said, Tracy, I know you've been in Venetia this year, the city where I live. Lucky you, Elena. What impressed you most about the city? I feel for you, Elena, for what has happened during the pandemic there. It must have been very disconcerting and difficult, but it also must have been kind of beautiful, not when there were no people there. I would love to have seen that. No tourists, no cruise ships. What do I love about Venice? Oh, everything. I just can't believe there's so much beauty. The architecture is the combination of buildings and water in a way that is just always inspiring. And so it certainly inspired me to write about it. So I'm writing about Venetian glass, and that's so hard. I might end up spending all my time in a furnace. So we'll see.
Yeah. I've got a couple of other questions. Laura asks, Falling Angels was the first book of yours I read, and safe to say I loved it. What made you want to write about the suffragist movement?
Wow. Okay. So Falling Angels is set mostly in Highgate Cemetery, and it's about two Edwardian families. And one of the women in one of the families becomes a suffragette. And I was researching that period, and it came up so much. I think I was writing about a woman, again, like what we were talking about earlier, a woman who's frustrated with her lack of power, whether it's financial, social, or political. And what could she do to try to rectify that? And when I was reading about the suffragettes, they're always presented in such a positive light, but I was wondering how it would affect. They became really obsessed, and I understandably, because it's a big issue, but I also wondered how it affected their families and their children. And so it's quite a lot about a mother-daughter relationship. I write a lot about mothers and daughters, not always in the most positive way, I have to say. So with the Venice book, I'm trying to write a mother-daughter relationship that's more positive. And I keep slipping back into the negative. So I think, no, Tracy, I think you need to think about this.
Yeah. Well, there's another question which actually probably would take an hour to answer, but I will ask it because I think it is interesting. Hannah asks, how do you conduct your research to be able to make it realistic as well as historically accurate? And for me, I would ask, how do you manage to get rid of it once you've done it? Because it never shows.
That's the key. And that's when you see beginning novelists, historical novelists who are showing off what they've learned. You have to, what my job is to create a world that you believe I know. Even though I haven't lived in 15th century Venice, I need you to think that I have. And in order to do that, I have to find out everything about the time, what people ate, what they smelled when they walked down the street, what it was like to be in one of those gondolas, what it felt like, what churches were like, what everything. But I can't show it. Once it's there, I have to absorb it all. And I probably do about 10 times as much research as actually shows on the page, but it's in me. And it allows me to sit down, and every day I kind of create this world. I always think of myself as kind of holding up this world and looking at it. I built it all around me, and then I write, and then it kind of the end of the day, and then the next day I have to do it again. And it's the history, it's the historical research that has allowed me to create that. And so I do it, I read a lot, I talk to experts, I go to the places, I've been looking, I would have been doing glass classes, but for the Venice book, I'm now looking at lots of YouTube videos on making glass because I can't be there. So it's just a combination of all that stuff.
You're
but
basically a method actor, aren't you?
A little bit, yeah. I guess me and Daniel Day-Lewis, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? No, I to a certain degree, but yeah, I guess I am.
Actually, talking of Daniel Day-Lewis, we didn't actually we should probably end it just by talking about what do you make of this film?
It's a lovely film.
Yeah, I remember watching it with you actually, and it was very, very moving. Yeah. But do you remember going on the set? And we I did. I always remember we had dinner with Scarlett Johansson when she was she was a child. I mean, she was 15 or 16.
She turned 18 on the set.
Oh, was it 18?
Yeah,
my memory of her was that I was sitting opposite her, and I was just thinking, how can this young child hold this whole film? And I hadn't seen her film, and then she was chewing gum, and we were all given spaghetti, and I was thinking, when is she going to take the gum out? And she didn't. She ate her spaghetti with her gum in. That's my overriding memory of that whole weekend.
That's so hard to imagine. Wow. Okay.
Well, I was quite admiring how she did that.
I think she's a really great example of, when they talk about a camera loving a face. Yeah. She's got it. I don't know what it is, but when you look at, when you see her in person, she's perfectly nice looking, but she's not glowing and incredible the way she is on screen. So it's one of those things. I had a great experience with it, and we should end with the second best advice you ever gave me. The first was to write the Vermeer book, and the second was when the producers were interested in buying the option to make the film, and we had this meeting with them, and they said something like, any chance I could try writing the screenplay? And you gave me this look like, and you said to me afterwards, Tracy, do you want to become a screenwriter? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe it probably pays better than writing novels. And you said, first of all, it doesn't pay better. And second of all, writing a novel is a very different thing. It's very solitary. Writing a screenplay is a completely different skill set. And it's all about writing with other people and stuff. And if you want to do that, okay, but this may not be the way to do it. But you write good novels. That's what you should do. Don't go and write screenplays. And I went back into the room with them. I think you had taken me out of the room. And I went back into the room with the producers and said, I'm not I'm not interested in being a part of the screenwriting. And they looked so relieved. So relieved. Thank you, because you're absolutely right.
It doesn't suit everyone. I do try and stop my novelists from writing screenplays, but some of them really want to, and it's fine. But it's so problematic. The joy of writing a novel is you're in complete control. It's your world, and okay, we can have some editorial to and fro, but that is your book, and it's never the same in other medium. Even though we all love film and telly. So look, I'm going to wrap it up. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have. It's 25 years, so I'm thrilled. Here's to another 25, Tracy. And,
absolutely.
And lots of fun. And thank everyone.
Thank you, Johnny, for everything you've done for me. It's been great.
It's lovely. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining. And remember to buy a single thread. Waterstones are offering a £2 discount. I am her agent. Remember that. Bye.
Bye.